The silence after the Queen's words seemed to stretch forever. Elias could still feel her hand pressing him against the cold crystal wall. Every second was heavy, every breath harder than the last. He had faced alien war machines, orbital bombardments, and hopeless battles, but never had he felt such pressure. He wasn't just one man standing here. He was carrying the weight of humanity's future. His voice finally broke the silence. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, his throat dry. "This is not what I expected." The Queen's eyes narrowed, slightly, though her grip did not tighten. "Expectation is the weakness of mortals," she said. "Survival belongs to those who adapt." Elias's delegation shifted uneasily. One of them, Commander Hayes, tried to step forward. "Queen Xylira, with respect," he began, his voice trembling. "We came here for peace talks, not—" The Queen's gaze flicked toward him, sharp and cold, and Hayes froze mid-sentence. Even from the corner of his eye, Elias could see the eye-die fear on his officer's face. The Queen's attention returned to him, and once again the hall seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them. "You are not here for words," she said. "You are here for peace, and I have told you how peace can be forged. There is no other way." Her hand finally released him, though she lingered close enough that her presence still filled his lungs like fire. Elias rubbed his shoulder, forcing himself to stand tall. Every instinct told him to reject the idea, to demand real negotiations, to call her bluff. But something in her tone told him it was not a bluff. He took a careful breath. "Why me?" he asked. The Queen tilted her head, the crystalline strands of her hair catching light from the glowing walls. "Because you are both soldier and diplomat. Because you came unarmed into my palace when others would have hidden behind fleets. And because your name already carries weight among your kind. They call you Survivor, don't they?" Elias felt a flicker of anger. She knew too much about him. Survivor is just another word for being lucky enough not to die where better men did. Her violet eyes softened for only a heartbeat, and then hardened again. Survivors rebuild what is broken. My people do not need martyrs, they need endurance. Before Elias could respond, the Queen turned and walked back toward her throne. Each step echoed like thunder. She ascended the dais and sat once more, her gaze never leaving him. "I will give you 3 days," she said. 3 cycles of your world, son. At the end you will answer me. If you agree, peace will rise between our species. If you refuse, the war will burn hotter than ever, and I will make sure Earth itself feels the fire. Elias's chest tightened. There it was, the real weight behind her demand. He wasn't choosing for himself. He was choosing for everyone. Humanity was on the edge already. If this marriage could end the bloodshed, could he refuse? But if it was a trap, if she only wanted him as a symbol, what then? The delegation was dismissed. Vorath guards escorted them to guest chambers deep inside the palace. The rooms were strange, walls alive with shifting light, furniture shaped for taller frames. Elias sat heavily on a curved seat, pressing his hands to his face. "This is madness," Hayes muttered, pacing. "She can't be serious. Marriage? It's a trick. She wants to humiliate us, break our will." Another delegate, Dr. Rana, shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I've studied Vorath politics for years. They respect bonds, oaths, blood ties. Marriage in their culture isn't just private. It's public law. If she weds him, she binds her entire throne to humanity. It's genius, risky, but genius." Hayes scoffed. "Genius? It's blackmail. She's forcing Cain to shoulder a galaxy's worth of pressure. We need to stall. We need to call command." Elias raised his head slowly. His voice was calm, though inside he felt anything but. "Command can't help us. Even if they could, there isn't time. She gave me 3 days. That's not long enough to get answers from Earth. This choice, it's mine." The room fell silent. No one wanted that truth, but they all knew it. That night, Elias found no rest. He stood at the balcony of his chamber, looking out across the alien city. Towers of crystal pierced the sky, glowing veins of energy running through them like lifeblood. Flying craft soared silently between them. Far below, he could see Vorath citizens moving through streets that pulsed with light. Families, children, life. Not so different from humans, he realized, just shaped by another world. He thought of his own home, of Earth's oceans and forests, of the colonies struggling to survive on harsh planets, of soldiers lying in shallow graves far from their families. Could he end that pain with one word? But then another thought came. Could he trust her? Was he just a piece in her strategy to keep her throne? As he struggled with these questions, the balcony shadows shifted. He turned sharply, hand reaching instinctively for a weapon he did not have. From the darkness stepped Queen Xylera herself, her crystal hair glinting faintly in moonlight. She wore no armor now, only a flowing garment of woven silver threads. She seemed taller still against the night. "You don't sleep?" she said, softly. Elias stiffened. "Hard to, with the galaxy on my shoulders." She studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, resting her hand on the railing. "Do you know why I chose marriage instead of treaty?" He kept his eyes on her. "Enlighten me." "Because a treaty is paper. Paper burns. But an oath, a bond, living beings bound, together, cannot be broken so easily. My rivals in the Dominion see me as weak because I refuse endless war. If I wed you, they cannot call me weak. They will see power. They will see that even our enemies kneel not in chains but in alliance. It will silence them." Elias frowned. "And what of me? What of my people? Do you think humanity will just accept this?" Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "They will, when they see their soldiers stand unbroken at my side. They will see hope where there was only war. You may not understand yet, but symbols are stronger than fleets." For the first time, Elias caught a glimpse beneath her steel mask. She was tired. Beneath her words, he heard not just strategy, but weariness, even loneliness. She wasn't only fighting for empire. She was fighting for survival in a world that expected her to be nothing but unshakable stone. "Why not choose one of your own?" he asked quietly. "One of your people. One of your nobles." She turned, her gaze to the stars. "Because none of them would change anything. They all carry the old blood of conquest, the same thinking that has bled this galaxy dry. But you are different. Your presence alone would shift the balance. And," she paused, her voice lowering, "I respect that you do not bend easily, even when pressed against walls." The memory of her hand pinning him returned with heat he forced himself to ignore. He straightened. "Respect doesn't make this easier. You're asking me to give up my life, my future, for something I barely understand." Her eyes met his, again unflinching. "I am not asking, I am offering. Power, peace, a place at my side as equal, not prisoner. Few rulers have made such an offer to their enemies." Elias was silent for a long time. At last he said, 3 days. "That's what you gave me. I'll give you your answer then." The queen studied him a moment longer. Then she inclined her head slightly, a gesture both regal and strangely personal. "Very well. Do not waste them." She turned and vanished back into shadow, leaving him with the city lights and the weight of impossible choice. The next 2 days were filled with meetings. Vorath nobles demanded audiences, some to glare at him with hatred, others to sneer at the thought of their queen wedding a human. A few, though, seemed curious, watching him as though trying to understand what she saw in him. Elias answered politely, but never promised. Every interaction reminded him how fragile this idea was. If he agreed, he would gain as many enemies as allies. But in small ways, he also learned more of their world. He watched Vorath children practicing games of strength in the streets. He saw markets filled with colors and sounds unlike anything human cities held. He even shared a quiet meal with Dr. Rana in a Vorath garden, where glowing plants whispered, "In the wind." For the first time, he began to see what peace could mean, not as an abstract idea, but as real lives continuing without war. On the morning of the 3rd day, as dawn light spilled across alien towers, Elias stood before a mirror. His reflection looked tired, older than his years. His choice was no clearer than before, but the time was gone. The queen would expect his answer. He whispered to himself, "What will humanity see when I speak? A traitor? A savior? Or just a man too tired of war to keep fighting?" The chamber doors opened. Guards waited. It was time to return to the throne hall, where the fate of two empires would be shaped by a single word. Elias walked into the throne hall on the third day with his decision weighing like a stone on his chest. The hall was crowded now, filled not just with guards and his small delegation, but with Vorath nobles, warlords, and priests. Their tall figures loomed in their strange garments of crystal and metal, their eyes sharp, their voices murmuring in a language that sounded like grinding stone. They were here to witness history, or perhaps to tear it apart. Queen Xylira sat upon her throne, back straight, eyes glowing with violet light. She looked calm, but Elias could sense the tension in the air. Her people were not united on this plan of hers. He could see it in their faces. Some looked curious, others disgusted, and some openly furious. He stood at the foot of the dais, his delegation behind him. The queen rose, her long figure casting a shadow over him. "Captain Elias Kane," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "3 days I gave you. Now give me your answer. Will you join me, bind your people to mine, and end this war with oath and bond?" The entire hall fell silent. Elias took a long breath. His heart pounded like a drum, but his voice came steady. "I will not say yes. Not yet. Not until I know the truth of your people, and not until I understand who you are beyond the throne. I cannot accept blind, and you should not want me to." Gasps rippled across the nobles. Some shouted in anger. A warlord with heavy armor slammed his fist on the ground, growling words that needed no translation. Refusal to them was insult. The queen raised her hand, silencing the hall. Her eyes stayed locked on Elias, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "You are braver than most," she said, "and wiser than they think. Very well. You will see my people, you will learn, and then you will answer me, not as a pawn, but as a man who knows what he accepts." The nobles erupted in protest, but the queen's glare cut them down. She turned back to Elias. "Come, Captain, walk the Dominion with me." What followed was nothing like the sterile diplomacy Elias had expected. Over the next days, he traveled through the heart of Vorath society under the queen's watchful eye. They walked through vast markets where alien merchants traded in glowing stones, living fabrics, and beasts with silver hides. They visited schools where young Vorath studied not just warcraft, but philosophy, where their crystal fingers traced ancient texts. They stood at temples carved from mountains where priests sang in voices that vibrated the very air. Everywhere they went, the people stared at Elias. Some whispered, some spat on the ground, some even reached to touch his uniform, as if to see if he was real. He was a curiosity, a hated enemy, and perhaps a possible hope. At first, Elias kept himself guarded, speaking little, watching everything. But slowly he began to notice the small things. A Vorath mother holding her child close, farmers laughing as they guided strange four-legged beasts, children who followed him from a distance giggling when he turned to look. They were not so different. They feared. They loved. They dreamed. One evening, as the twin moons of the Vorath world rose over the horizon, he and the queen stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Lights pulsed across towers like veins of energy. The air smelled faintly of spice and smoke. "You wanted to see truth," the queen said quietly. "Now you have seen. Do you still think we are monsters?" Elias leaned on the railing, his eyes on the glowing streets below. "I never thought your people were monsters, but I did think they were enemies who couldn't change. Now I'm not so sure." She studied him in silence, and for a moment the heavy weight of her crown seemed to fall away. In that brief quiet, he saw not just a queen, but a woman who carried the burden of a galaxy on her shoulders. But peace was never easy, and not all wanted it. The attack came the very next day. Elias was walking with 2 Vorath guards down a palace corridor when the air suddenly trembled. A high-pitched whine filled the hall. Instinct screamed at him a second before the explosion ripped through the wall. Shards of crystal blasted outward. The guards shoved him down, but more figures stormed. Through the smoke. Assassins in dark armor moving fast, blades gleaming. Elias rolled to his feet, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon. The blade was heavy, not like human steel but humming with energy. He swung as the first assassin lunged, barely deflecting the strike. Sparks showered the floor. He fought with soldiers' reflexes, but these were killers trained for speed. The queen herself appeared at the end of the corridor, guards rushing to shield her. But she did not stay behind them. She drew her own weapon, a staff that glowed with violet fire, and charged forward with terrifying grace. Each strike of her staff sent assassins flying. Elias fought beside her, every breath burning, every swing desperate. One assassin broke through and slashed for his throat, but the queen's staff intercepted, crackling with light. She shoved the enemy back, then reached for Elias's shoulder, pulling him close. "Stay with me," she ordered. By the time palace guards overwhelmed the attackers, the corridor was a ruin of shattered crystal and blood. The assassins lay broken, but the message was clear. Not all of the Dominion accepted the Queen's plan. Some would rather kill a human than see peace. Afterward, Elias sat in a chamber lit by pale fire. His arm bled from a shallow cut, but it was nothing compared to the storm in his chest. The Queen entered, her silver skin marked with scratches, her armor scorched. She dismissed the healers with a wave. "You fought well," she said, her voice low. "I survived," Elias answered, binding his arm. She stepped closer, her eyes on him. "You still think this is only politics? You still think I can make this choice without risk? Those assassins would rather see me dead than see peace. But I will not yield to them. I will not yield to anyone." Her words rang with fire, but beneath them Elias heard something else. Resolve carved from fear and loneliness. She was fighting not just for her people but for herself, for the right to rule on her own terms. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "If I stand with you, I won't be your decoration. I won't be your symbol while you fight alone. I'll fight beside you. That's the only way this will work." For the first time, Queen Zalera's stern mask cracked. A flicker of respect, perhaps even trust, touched her eyes. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "there is hope for us after all." The days that followed were filled with whispers. The attempt on Elias's life spread across the Dominion. Some saw it as proof that the marriage was cursed. Others began to wonder if perhaps the Queen's choice carried strength after all. After all, the human had survived, fighting side by side with their ruler. Elias and the Queen continued to walk among her people. Slowly, the distance between them lessened. He began to ask questions, not just about politics, but about her life, her burdens, her dreams. And she answered, not always warmly, but honestly. She spoke of her father, a warlord who ruled with fire, of her mother, who believed peace was weakness, of her own rise to the throne filled with betrayal and blood. And in return, Elias spoke of earth, of oceans and forests, of soldiers who fought not for conquest but for survival, of children who wanted only to grow up without the sound of bombs. He told her of laughter in the barracks, of music sung around campfires, of the stubbornness of humanity to keep going even when the stars themselves seemed to fall. Slowly, something shifted between them. Respect grew where there had been only suspicion. And though neither spoke it aloud, a bond was forming, one built not of politics alone but of shared struggle and fragile trust. Yet the deadline still hung over them. The Queen had given him 3 days to answer. Those 3 days had stretched with learning, with danger, with blood. And now the time was nearly gone. On the last night before his decision, Elias stood once more on the balcony of his chamber. The city below glowed in silence. His mind was no clearer, yet his heart beat with something new, something he could not yet name. Behind him, footsteps sounded. The Queen's voice came, calm, but edged with steel. "Tomorrow, Captain, you will answer me." and your answer will shape not just our worlds but what lies between us." Elias turned, meeting her eyes. This time, he did not feel like prey pressed against a wall. This time, he felt like a man standing at the edge of a choice that could change everything. And he knew that whatever he said tomorrow, it would not be the same Elias Kane who had first walked into this palace. The morning of the fourth day arrived with a tension that could be felt across the palace. The air was sharp, like the static before a storm. Word had spread that a rival warlord, one of the queen's most powerful vassals, was preparing a rebellion. Some claimed he would strike the palace itself, while others whispered that he would challenge the queen openly during the ceremony that was meant to formalize her bond with Elias. Elias moved through the corridors with a sense of purpose he had not felt since his earliest days as a soldier. The palace was quieter than usual, the guards alert, and every shadow seemed to carry the possibility of ambush. The queen had summoned him to the strategy chamber, a large hall with a circular map of the Dominion projected in glowing lines. Above a central table, "You have learned our ways," the queen said as he entered, her voice calm but her violet eyes hard. "You know what is at stake. You will need to fight by my side." Elias nodded. "I've faced war before, Majesty. I will stand with you." The queen's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is not just another battle. This is the test of both our species. If we fail, the Dominion will tear itself apart and humanity will be dragged into the fire." They reviewed the movements of the warlord's forces. His armies were fewer in number but highly trained and loyal. They had captured several forward cities in the past week, and his influence among the nobles was growing. If he challenged the queen publicly during her engagement ceremony, it could spark open rebellion. "We can't let him gain momentum," Elias said, tracing the projection with his hand. "We need to strike fast, but with precision. A direct attack on him could work, but we risk civilian casualties." The queen studied him. "Your people do not fight as we do. You value precision and caution. Perhaps that is why I have kept you by my side these days, not just as a symbol, but as an ally." Her words made Elias uneasy. He was no symbol. He was a soldier. But the thought that the queen might trust him in battle, truly trust him, made him feel a strange sense of responsibility and pride. By the time they left the strategy chamber, the city was already alert. Guards were stationed. On every street, patrols moved in silent waves and the queen's private army readied for the confrontation. Elias felt the weight of human responsibility on him, the duty to protect not only the queen but the fragile hope of peace between worlds. The engagement ceremony was set in the central plaza of the palace, a vast space surrounded by crystal towers. Citizens of the Dominion were gathered, some curious, some skeptical, and some openly hostile. The ceremony was meant to be a display of unity, of trust between human and alien. The queen appeared first, descending a flight of steps from her throne room. Elias followed, clad in ceremonial armor that was heavier than anything he had worn in human service. But it felt good. It felt real. As they walked, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, some whispered, and a few spat in disgust. Elias ignored them all, focusing on the queen and the purpose they shared. Then the warlord arrived. He came with a contingent of his elite guard, their black armor gleaming under the light. His face was twisted with anger, and when he saw Elias, his eyes narrowed with pure hatred. He had expected this to be a human bowing in defeat, not standing, alongside the queen. "You dare bring a human to this plaza?" the warlord roared. His voice carried across the crowd. "You betray your own people, your own race, for a mortal." The queen's violet eyes flashed. "I bring someone who will help us secure peace, not destruction. You have your choice, to fight for the future or to die clinging to your past." The warlord laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Peace? There is no peace. Only strength. And strength belongs to those willing to strike first." Before Elias could react, the warlord's guards advanced, weapons drawn, energy blades igniting in lethal arcs. The plaza erupted into chaos. Citizens scattered, some running for cover, others frozen in fear. Elias raised his weapon. His training took over. He moved swiftly, striking one of the elite guards before they could reach the queen. Sparks flew as energy blades collided. He fought not just for himself, but for humanity, and for the hope of ending centuries of conflict. The queen moved with terrifying grace beside him. Each swing of her staff sent enemies sprawling, her speed unmatched. She struck with precision, avoiding civilians while taking down the most dangerous threats. Elias marveled at her skill, but he did not have time to admire. He had to survive. The battle stretched across the plaza. Elias and the queen fought side by side, their movements in a strange synchronization that seemed almost instinctive. Guards fell, civilians fled, and the rival warlord's confidence began to waver. Elias caught sight of the warlord, moving toward the queen with a weapon designed to kill instantly. Without thinking, he charged, blocking the weapon with his own blade and throwing the warlord off balance. The queen took advantage immediately, striking with her staff and sending the warlord crashing to the ground. The remaining enemies hesitated. Their leader had fallen, and the sight of a human fighting so boldly beside their queen unsettled them. One by one they retreated, and the plaza fell silent once again, save for the heavy breathing of those who had survived. Elias lowered his weapon, sweat and blood mixing on his brow. The queen stood before him unscathed but glowing with energy from exertion. She reached out her hand, not just in command but as a gesture of trust. "You did well," she said softly. "Your people are lucky to have someone like you. And perhaps so am I." Elias took her hand, feeling the power behind it and yet something warmer, something human as well. "I stand with you," he said quietly, "not as a pawn, not as a symbol, but as an ally." For the first time, the crowd, still scattered and tense, began to cheer. Some were cheering for the queen, some for Elias, and some simply for the hope that the battle had not claimed the lives of innocents. The message was clear. This union was no longer just a symbol. It was becoming real in the eyes of the people. The warlord had been defeated, but Elias knew this was only the beginning. The queen's rivals would not vanish entirely. There would be whispers, conspiracies, attempts to undermine them both. But for now, the battle had shown that peace, even if fragile, could be enforced with courage and unity. That evening, Elias and the queen returned to the palace. Silence filled the hallways. As they walked, each lost in their thoughts. The battle had been won, but their bond was still untested. "You could have been killed today," Elias said finally, breaking the quiet. "And yet I was not," the queen replied, "because you stood beside me. That is rare. That is courage." Elias swallowed. "I was only doing my duty, but I won't lie. I respected you more today than I did the first time we met." Her eyes softened, a rare smile touching her lips. "And I respect you. Perhaps more than I should." The moment hung between them, delicate and dangerous. Both knew what was coming, the final choice, the commitment that would bind them together. And both understood that once it was made, there would be no turning back. That night, Elias could not sleep. He paced his chamber, thinking of the warlord, the citizens, the queen, and the fragile hope that lay in his hands. He thought of humanity, of its stubbornness, its flaws, and its surprising strength. He thought of the queen, of her beauty, her power, and the burden she carried alone. When the dawn approached, Elias knew his answer would not be simple. He could not promise blindly. He could not promise without understanding the weight he was about to bear. But he could promise courage, honesty, and a willingness to fight for something larger than himself. Tomorrow, he would speak. Tomorrow, he would decide. And whether the queen accepted or not, whether the Dominion cheered or rebelled, the galaxy would never be the same. For the first time, Elias Kane felt the true weight of history on his shoulders, and he was ready to bear it. The morning sun touched the spires of the Vorath Palace, casting long, shimmering shadows across the central plaza. Elias Kane stood at the edge of the balcony, his uniform immaculate, his mind racing. Today was the day. Today, he would give his answer to Queen Xylera, and in doing so, shape the fate of two species. The plaza below was already filling with citizens. Vorath families had gathered, curious and cautious, whispers rippling like wind through the crowd. Soldiers lined the streets, their weapons lowered but alert. Every eye turned toward the throne room, waiting for the moment that would make history. The queen appeared at the top of the steps, regal and commanding as ever. Her violet eyes found Elias's immediately, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to only the two of them. The events of the past days, the warlord's betrayal, the city tours, the assassination attempts, the shared moments of trust, flashed through his mind. He remembered the first time she had pinned him against the wall, demanding marriage. He remembered the shock, the disbelief, the impossibility of it. And now, standing here, he understood her. Not just as a queen, but as a ruler carrying the weight of a galaxy. As a being who had risked everything to end war, to create hope. The crowd fell silent as the queen descended the steps, reaching the plaza. She stopped just before the final step, her presence radiating authority and power. "Captain Elias Kane," she said, her voice carrying over the gathering. "The time has come. Will you accept my offer and stand with me as consort, as ally and as equal?" Elias stepped forward, feeling the weight of every human who had ever fought, died, or hoped for peace. He could see his delegation watching from the palace balcony above, their faces tense, waiting for the word that could save or doom countless lives. He inhaled deeply. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts inside. "I have seen your people. I have seen your cities, your schools, your markets. I have seen your children, your mothers, your soldiers. I have seen what it means to live under your rule, not as a subject but as a part of a civilization that can choose to be better." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly, curiosity flickering in her gaze. "I have also fought beside you," he continued, "against those who would destroy the possibility of peace. I have seen courage in ways I never thought possible, in you and in your people. And I have learned that strength is not measured in fleets or weapons alone, but in the willingness to take risks, to stand for something larger than oneself." A hush fell over the plaza. Even the wind seemed to wait for his next words. Elias stepped closer to the steps, his gaze locked on the queen. "I will accept your offer, not because it is easy, not because it is safe, but because it is right. I will stand with you, and together we will show both our worlds that peace is possible when courage and trust guide our actions." The plaza erupted in sound. Some citizens cheered, some gasped, some cried. Elias could hear the voices of humans and Vorath alike celebrating a choice that had seemed impossible. Queen Xylera stepped down the final step to stand before him. Her violet eyes softened and a rare, genuine smile touched her lips. She extended her hand and Elias took it, feeling the warmth and strength behind her grasp. "Then it is done," she said. "Together we will shape a new future, one not of war but of understanding and unity." The ceremony that followed was unlike any Elias had ever imagined. It was simple, yet profound. Priests spoke words in the ancient Vorath language, words that Elias could not understand but felt in his chest, resonating like a drum. The crowd watched in awe as the queen and the human captain exchanged symbols of bond, threads of silver and crystal, ancient oaths, promises to fight for peace and prosperity. When it was finished, Elias looked at the queen and felt something shift between them. They had faced danger, assassination, rebellion, and doubt. Yet here they stood, not as conqueror and captive, not as alien and human, but as partners bound by choice and courage. The days that followed were filled with work. The queen and Elias moved through the cities, reassuring citizens, addressing nobles, and mending the cracks left by decades of war. Some resisted, some mocked, but many began to see that this union was more than a symbol. It was hope. Elias found himself walking through streets he had once viewed with suspicion, now seeing the beauty in the lives of the Vorath people, Children ran to him, calling his name in curious tones, and he smiled, realizing that the galaxy was not just a battlefield. It was full of life worth protecting. The Queen, too, began to show more of herself. She spoke to him not just of strategy and politics, but of her fears, her dreams, and her desire for a galaxy where her people could thrive without bloodshed. Elias listened, offering counsel, sharing laughter, and sometimes just standing in silence, feeling the weight of shared responsibility. One evening, as they walked along a terrace overlooking the glowing city, the Queen stopped and looked at him. "You have changed more than you realize, Elias Kane," she said. "Not just your people, but yourself. You have become part of this world, and part of me." He turned to her, feeling the truth in her words. "And you have changed me. Majesty, you've shown me that even in a galaxy filled with war, there is room for hope, for trust, and for courage. Together, we can do what neither of us could alone." For the first time, Elias felt the full weight of their bond, not as obligation, not as duty, but as choice. The human in him, who had fought countless battles, who had faced death more times than he could count, now felt a new kind of strength, the strength to build, to protect, and to lead alongside someone he respected and trusted. Weeks passed and peace began to take root. Messages of cooperation flowed between human colonies and Vorath cities. Trade resumed. Knowledge was shared. Children played in streets that had once been filled with fear. And throughout it all, Elias and the Queen walked side by side, not just as rulers, but as symbols of a new era. One night, as they stood together on a balcony watching the twin moons rise, Elias spoke quietly. "Do you ever wonder if we've made the right choice?" The Queen looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moon's glow. "Every choice carries risk, but this is the only way to change what has been broken for centuries. We cannot undo the past, but we can shape the future, and I believe, Elias, that together we will make it better." He nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Then we keep moving forward, together, no matter what comes next." And so, the human soldier and the alien Queen began their journey, not just as allies, but as partners in a galaxy finally beginning to see the possibility of peace. The battles would not end, challenges would come, and there would be skeptics and enemies. But Elias Kane, once just a soldier frozen by impossible demands, had found a purpose greater than himself. He had found courage, trust, and a bond that would change the course of history. For in the end, it was not the fleets or weapons that ensured survival, but the strength to stand together, human and Vorath alike, and face the stars as one. And as the twin moons bathed the city in silver light, Elias knew that the galaxy had finally glimpsed a future worth fighting for. The great station of Orion's Reach floated between the stars like a shining crown. It was not built by one people, nor did it belong to one world. It was a neutral ground, a place where empires could meet without fear, where treaties could be signed, and words could take the place of war. Its halls stretched wide with polished metal and glass, filled with the hum of many voices and the echo of countless languages. Captain Elias Ward stepped off the human cruiser with steady boots and calm eyes. He had been chosen as part of the escort, not for his rank, but for his reputation. Among the human soldiers, he was known as a man who could keep his head when others faltered. He was not loud, nor did he seek attention, but when he walked into a room, people noticed. He carried himself with the strength of someone who had seen battles and survived, and yet with a restraint that showed he was not eager for more. The humans had been invited to Orion's Reach for a gathering of several powers. Among them were the Elari, a people whose pale skin shimmered faintly in light, whose slender forms moved with quiet grace. Their royal family had sent their youngest daughter, Princess Lyra, to represent them. She was not a warrior, nor a skilled speaker, but her presence was meant to show goodwill. When Elias first saw her across the hall, she was surrounded by attendants and guards of her own kind. Her long silver hair flowed down her back, and her wide violet eyes seemed to catch every flicker of light. She stood straight, but there was a tension in her posture, as if she wished to vanish behind the folds of her ceremonial robe. She was younger than most gathered there, and her gaze moved nervously from one figure to the next. Their meeting was arranged as part of the introduction ritual. Delegates lined the hall, greeting one another in turn. When it was time for the human warrior to greet the Aelari princess, Elias stepped forward without hesitation. His dark uniform, marked with the human insignia, made a stark contrast to, her flowing silver attire. Lyra's breath caught as he approached. She had heard of humans, creatures of war, strong and fearless, whose voices could shake walls and whose hands could bend steel. Stories of their victories spread across the galaxy, and though they were now allies in diplomacy, the tales of their ferocity lingered. She felt her heart race faster, her palms warming despite the cool air of the station. He bowed his head slightly, not too deep, not too shallow. "Princess Lyra," he said, his voice steady and calm. Her throat tightened. She tried to answer, but the words tangled. I greet you, Captain." Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, and she hoped it had not sounded foolish. Elias's eyes met hers, but unlike the piercing stares she feared, his gaze was even, patient. He nodded once more. "An honor," he replied simply. She felt her cheeks flush. Why did he not laugh at her stammer? Why did he not frown at her hesitation? She lowered her eyes quickly, clutching the edge of her sleeve to hide the slight tremble in her hand. The attendants moved them along, but the brief exchange stayed with her. Throughout the hall, she could feel his presence behind her, steady and unshaken, while she struggled to keep her breath calm. Later, when the gathering shifted to quieter discussions, Elias was assigned to remain near the Aelari delegation, not as a direct guard but as a representative of human strength and trustworthiness. He stood at the edge of the room, silent, observing. Lyra could not help but notice how still he was, how he did not fidget or lean against the walls like others. He was simply there, as solid as a mountain. She tried not to stare, yet her eyes wandered to him again and again. Every time she caught herself, she turned quickly, pretending to study the banners on the walls or the glowing ornaments hung from the ceiling. But the thought kept circling in her mind. How could one being appear so unshaken? When her turn came, to speak briefly before the assembly, she rose, her hands folded together. She spoke of peace, of the hope that Aelari and human ties would grow stronger. Her words chosen carefully and practiced many times. Yet as she spoke, she saw Elias in the corner, listening, his expression unchanged but attentive. Her voice faltered for a moment, almost breaking. She forced herself to continue, her heart beating too fast, her throat dry. She ended her speech, quicker than planned, and sat down, her cheeks hot. Elias noticed. He did not smile nor shake his head. He merely stood, a quiet pillar. Somehow his lack of judgment was worse and better at the same time. After the speeches, the delegates mingled. Lyra found herself near him again, almost by accident. Her attendants drifted away to speak with others, and she stood only a few steps from the human warrior. The silence grew heavy between them. "You spoke well," Elias said at last, his tone simple but sincere. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. I did not," she whispered, then immediately regretted her honesty. She should not have admitted weakness. But he only tilted his head slightly. "You did. You said what needed to be said, that is enough." His calm words sank deeper than any praise could. She bit her lip, unsure what to answer. Instead, she gave a small nod, unable to hold his gaze for long. As the evening went on, she found herself moving nearer whenever possible, as if drawn by his quiet strength. Her shyness did not leave her. It clung to her with every step, making her stumble over her words, making her avoid his steady eyes. Yet at the same time she felt a strange safety near him, as though the world could shake apart and he would still remain. And if he remained, then perhaps she could as well. When the gathering ended for the day, she returned to her chambers, her attendants fussing over her robes and her schedule for the next session. But her thoughts were not with them. They were with the human warrior who had spoken only a handful of words to her, and yet whose presence had unsettled and steadied her at once. In the quiet of her room, she sat before the wide window, looking out into the endless stars. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the quick rhythm of her heart. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm. You must stay calm." But the memory of his voice returned, and calm was the one thing she could not find.